When Vincent, born in Ireland, called me, oh, I think a bit more than a year ago now, the first time, and he's just the greatest guy, and he was calling me because he realized that I was probably the original author of this whole thing that stirred up all this monetary reform thing now, and he wanted to test me, and he's a very bright guy, and very intuitive and knowledgeable about justice. And one of the first things he asked me is whether or not I knew what a sovereign republic is, and I knew that although I would conceive of what a combination of those terms might imply, at least I knew, because I already gauged that I was speaking with a brilliant person, that he was implying something that was beyond my probable realm of experience. So I said, no, explain it to me. And he explained to me that there was this idea of the sovereign individual as I've conceived of it, as a necessary means of achieving solution in Ireland hundreds of years ago. So this is what the true formal Republic of Eire, E-I-R-E, it consists of. So this is a thought, similar to the Magna Carta, and thinking of John Locke and Thomas Jefferson, of the greatest minds in history, have all pretty much focused on, even if they didn't get so far as this idea of the rights, inalienable rights of a sovereign individual. Jefferson comes so close to stating exactly that in the Declaration of Independence, and he also, does this tremendous amount of writing about the rights of an individual or a minority are never, never, never to be infringed upon by a majority. Always the rights of a minority or an individual are to be respected. So it was foremost in his thinking as well, and I would say in my gauging of his writing, that I would say it was the thing that he most was tempted to think might be the unraveling of a republic, and indeed it is. You see,
that's right. Yeah.
So in any case, this implementation, this transition to mathematically perfected economy is accomplished simply by refinancing all our debts under mathematically perfected economy and establishing this common monetary foundry. Then, given what circulation is in our possession, in our accounts, we take the sum of the value of all things, subtract from that what circulation exists, and then, being as under mathematically perfected economy, if we had lived under mathematically perfected economy all this while, we distribute the difference to the accounts of the people according to a pattern, which I'm not going to define because my plagiarists will come out with such a law tomorrow morning. I guarantee you, if I tell it online right now. But there is a way of doing this to exact justice to the penny, and immediately. So basically, this would restore to our accounts all that we would need to sustain ourselves through our retired years, and if we're retired, or if we're still working, it would restore to our accounts what we would have saved. Now, in regard to enforcing payment of debt, we have to realize that, say for instance, a person retires, we give a person options to determine insofar as retirement, providing for their own retirement is concerned. This is not socialism. This is true free enterprise, but we're saying individuals have to be responsible for their own retirement.
That's right. Or you're going to get socialism.
Right, exactly. And we're going to lose control of our money, and it's going to be spent for other things other than Social Security, as it has been in the United States. The funds have been gutted. There's a huge, huge issue just there, which itself would engender terminal failure because we don't have the capacity to sustain the generations that are retiring now into the near-term future, even with what's there. We've already accumulated far above a terminal sum of federal debt since the early '80s in most countries. Once Reagan he decreased tax rates for 3 years, then he restored them to what they were, and they've never gone up as we've accumulated all the further debt that we have since then. And so we haven't even serviced this further accumulation of debt, which tells you how badly in the hole we are. We'll never work our way out of this. It's impossible, especially since all the while that we maintain a vital circulation, we'll be borrowing all the principal back as new debt equal to the old, making it mathematically impossible to pay down the sum of debt, which tells you right there you can only fail.
Yeah, and the people need to understand too that once the pinch happens, the pinch is only in one direction, yours. The pinch is never in the direction of the private bankers. They always get their payments, so you can have less hospitals, less schools. Your roads are going to have potholes, and privately you're going to be maybe not able to afford a house or live in a house with a leaky roof or maybe some black mold and things like that. And that's the direction where the suffering is going to happen. But there will never be a late loan payment or a missed loan payment as long as these politicians can afford it.
There's one correction on that. Private bankers don't get paid because the concept here is you have a central bank and you have peripheral banks. The peripheral banks ostensibly borrow money from the central bank. That's part of the facade. The central bank is a publisher of the evidence of our promissory obligations to each other. So part of the lie is that these peripheral banks borrow money from the central bank and then loan it to us. But see, when this process of maintaining a vital circulation precipitates into a terminal sum of debt, and we can no longer service the further debt, you see, we can't afford to borrow further, nor can we service the further debt. So these peripheral banks begin to fail because we can't pay them, and they can't pay the central bank. But the central bank theoretically can't fail. Yes, indeed, the peripheral banks may under complete failure, fail to resolve the artificial sum of debt any further, but yet we've been dispossessed of all of our production to the central bank then.
Yeah, Mike, I was just referring to the massive
right, I just want to make that clear
debt payments that the government's making to the private banks. Because in Canada, we have the Bank of Canada, but they use it for 3% of public funding. The other 97% comes from the private banks, to the tune of, over the last 15 years, nearly $1 trillion.
Yeah.
And for a country our size, you need to multiply that. That'd be the equivalent of you guys spending over $10 trillion.
Mm-hmm. Oh, and we're spending much more than you're actually being told in the news.
These are the things that we can only say. And even if you go look at the government reports, I mean, the people should go Google. If you're Canadian, go Google the bank statements of the government they put out, and you'll notice that all their summaries, they one of the footnotes is, this doesn't include any cumulative interest payments. They leave it out. Right. As if it's not even part of the deal, whereas it's the biggest part of the deal.
Sure. And another example of that is, they claim that the Federal Reserve gives back its profits to the federal government. It's such a lie. It's preposterous. In fact, there was a professor at a university many, many, many years ago, early 90s, who had came up with web pages in response to my online presence, and I was actually online 10 years before a formal internet, since 83 and 4. I published to public bulletin boards my documentation of this thesis, all copyrighted and trademarked even then, including the models I provided the Reagan administration, which calculated that this failure would transpire at approximately 2010 AD. They didn't even know what interest rates they would charge. And I said, well, what I'll do is once we get to the brink of failure at given interest rates, I'll write an algorithm that'll reduce the interest rates just enough to sustain us a while longer. And we get across the brink of it at those interest rates for the indebtedness that we have, we'll reduce them some more. And indeed, it's amazing how this parallels the actual pattern of reduction of interest rates. But, how could you hit it more on the head? then in 1983 and 4 to calculate that the maximum possible lifespan of this purported economy, this lie of economy, which is only a system of exploitation which multiplies artificial costliness on us into terminal dispossession and failure. To say that in 1983 and 4 that it would fail in approximately 2010 AD, and we are in failure. That's another point. We're already here. We're artificially sustaining it by spending this money into circulation constantly at itself and in escalating rate. Because we have to maintain a vital circulation. We're immediately in failure, as you said earlier. We would pay practically everything in circulation would be paid out of circulation in about a month. That's how fast the curtain would drop.
And that was just my gut feeling that it would probably take about a month for it to collapse.
But it's very accurate mathematically. That's approximate. Practically everything our period is monthly, and practically everything that we pay in a month against all our costs is going toward interest. There's very little profit in almost any and every business. Almost everything, if you trace it all out, it goes out to interest and principal on this monumental sum of indebtedness.
And a phrase that I came across years ago, and I think it was G. Edward Griffin who coined the phrase, at least when I was in the early days of understanding what was going on. And it's instructive for people to understand what kind of sums of money we're talking about. I think that the idea is that if you ask anybody to envision 1,000, just think 1,000 people can actually correctly sort of look at a crowd of 1,000 or maybe 2 or 3 or 4 and roughly gauge how many people are there. Mm-hmm. That becomes impossible at 1 million. People the masses are so large they can't tell the difference between 1 million and 5 million.
You actually start to lose accuracy right around 2,000 or so.
Is that it? Yeah. And so, but we're not talking about 1 million. We're talking about billions and trillions.
Yeah.
We're talking
a million is 1,000 thousand.
It's
a billion is 1,000 million. A trillion is 1,000 billion.
It's amazing.
When you're talking about a trillion, it's pretty much an unfathomable number for anyone who isn't working in a discipline where conceiving of exactly what a trillion means is incumbent upon them. It's just a number. It's just a word.
It's just a number. And the phrase that G. Edward Griffin, I think it was, used, he says we're talking about a river of money so wide you can't think across it.
Well, that's a pretty good expression, although I don't think too much of G. Edward Griffin. He produced an article, that purports to invalidate my thesis of inevitable failure, that it's not inevitable that interest multiplies artificial indebtedness in proportion to a circulation.
Well, I understand that, Mike, but my position is this. I think that I'm well aware of that some people have an opinion on this side and an opinion on that side. Obviously, I'm going with what you've done, and I do that because my engineering mind tells me to do that.
Well, the only reason that I'm explaining it is because, so that people can understand, where when they hear these other things,
where he's at,
they can unravel it, because, and I know that you understand it. What I was saying is that, Griffin's example, and I've got an article where I cite him on my pages because I produced an invalidation of his attempt to invalidate.
Mm-hmm,
and his response to it is something that we all should know about now, because he's an Austrian economist, a friend of Ron Paul's. They're both Austrian economists who advocate interest, and the only historical reason that Austrian economists give that there's any disposition against interest is religious sentimentality. There's no mathematic analysis of it whatsoever. In fact, they object to any mathematic analysis at all, ostensibly because math can't be applied to economics because it involves indeterminate human behavior. On the contrary, as I've explained for 40 years, you calculate the increasing indebtedness by no more indeterminable a formula than the bank calculates your next month's interest. It's as simple and concrete as that.
And that's right, and that's why I'm on board, and that's why I think people need to be on board too, just because you can
what
get
I was
in.
explaining is that Griffin, claims that actually we could say we're paying $80 a month of interest toward our mortgage, which it's likely to be far more than that, of course. And I'm probably average across the United States is better than $1,000 a month toward interest. And so he claims that we could go wax floors at night when the bank was closed. But of course, if it's $80 and you can get $80 of work from a bank, yes, that's reintroducing that much to circulation without reborrowing it as new debt above the former sum of debt. The thing is, it's impossible for that to happen. Why?